As we all know, last week an American Airlines flight collided with a military helicopter in what ended up being the most deadly aviation crash in recent US history. Since that time, conspiracy theories have swirled, with Republicans blaming DEI and women in the cockpit for the crash, while others have questioned whether the collision was intentional, an act of terrorism, or related to the Trump administration's federal workforce cuts. But what if I told you that some people predicted this exact type of crash would happen well over a year ago?
They won't do anything until something catastrophic does occur, until people do die. The people we talk to say there really is no excuse for the FAA not to do something before one of these close calls leads to a fatal crash.
And their warnings went almost entirely unheeded. Hey guys, I'm Hannah Cox. Welcome to my channel where I bring you my politically homeless takes on politics and culture. If you are also politically homeless, make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of my episodes. Also, if you enjoy this video, please drop a like and a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are. Okay, so it's good to be back with you all. I took last Thursday and Friday off to do some wedding dress shopping with my mom and sister. I meant to mention that I was going to be doing that and completely forgot, so sorry to leave you hanging. And if you're confused by the fact I was wedding dress shopping, I guess I'll clarify. Yes, I am already married. My husband and I got courthouse married last April, but we are still planning a ceremony probably later this year. I'm just doing it very slowly because I hate wedding culture and planning a wedding sucks. But anyways, as I was making progress on that endeavor, a lot went down over the past couple of days. And this topic is one that I had to circle back on because I have been looking at the data and paying attention to the warnings around plane crashes and their increasing probability for months. I have to give the New York Times their flowers on this one. I don't usually like or trust the mainstream media, but they have been helping the whistleblowers ring the alarm on this front for some time. In fact, all the way back in the fall of 2023, they ran this episode on their podcast, The Daily, that was titled "Passenger Planes Nearly Collide Far More Than You Know," which was obviously a pretty ominous headline. For their reporting, they spoke with pilots and air traffic controllers, and they even combed through NASA's database to get a better picture of what was happening in the air. And what they found was that near collisions were happening multiple times on average every week. They presented July of 2023 in this episode as one example of the data, where they found 46 close calls that had occurred involving commercial passenger planes in the US during that month alone, which is more than one a day. Like, just listen to this.
These near collisions are occurring so frequently that we have people in the aviation industry warning that we might be on borrowed time here, that a collision is more likely than you want to believe it is. A longtime airline captain who'd been involved in a close call wrote, "Honestly, this stuff scares the crap out of me." And another pilot, after being involved in a close call on a runway in January, wrote, "This has really opened my eyes to how the next aviation accident may play out." So in March, the chairwoman of the National Transportation Safety Board, she said, quote, "The absence of a fatality or an accident doesn't mean the presence of safety." And she went on to say that these close calls must serve as a wake-up call for every single one of us before something more catastrophic occurs, before lives are lost.
So they have known for some time that this kind of crash, like we saw last week, was not only increasingly a possibility, but actually a probability, which means we also knew why this was increasingly likely, and it is the least shocking news of all time. The reasons for that factor trace entirely back to the things the government has been doing to undermine our safety system for many, many years. But Republicans stay missing easy layups these days. This should be a perfect opportunity for them to come in as a new administration, point to the government being the problem, point to the need to reduce it. This would bolster their arguments if that was what they were choosing to do. But instead, they are doing exactly what they did during the LA wildfires last month, which is that they are missing this very obvious, easy layup and instead are wasting their time blaming DEI policies with no proof, I might add.
Office, they put a big push to put diversity into the FAA's program. Then another article, the Federal Aviation Administration, this was before I got to office, recently, second term. The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website.
He showed up with one message: it's DEI's fault. Then Hegseth says DEI, then Duffy says DEI, and then J.D. Vance, maybe playing a little bit of cleanup, says, well, if it wasn't DEI in terms of the pilots it's very stressful to work with people when we have these kinds of DEI policies. DEI is not a scapegoat for everything. It is, I get it, for some voters, it's what they want to hear about.
Do you have any evidence that any of those hires that were there at the control Wednesday night were DEI hires?
No, the president's been very clear about this. This is not saying that the person who was at the controls is a DEI hire, but let's just say, first of all, we should investigate everything, but let's just say the person at the controls didn't have enough staffing around him or her because we were turning people away because of DEI reasons. There is a very direct connection between the policies of the last administration and short-staffed air traffic controllers. That has to stop. And by the way, it's so funny to me, the media has picked up on this, not you, of course, Maria, but others have picked up on this. The president made very clear that he wasn't blaming anybody, but he was being very explicit about the fact that DEI policies have led our air traffic controllers to be short-staffed. That is a scandal. Thankfully, it's a scandal that the president has stopped.
When Donald Trump was actually pressed and asked about this and asked how he knew that DEI was a factor in this crash, he said it was just common sense. So he's just blowing hot air. He has no evidence of this. And clearly you can see JD Vance trying to do some damage control, trying to walk back those comments and downplay it and say, well, Trump didn't actually blame anyone in particular. But yes, he did. He pointed the finger at DEI hires, and his base has now taken that directive and gone to bat, attacking the female pilot who we now know was one of the casualties in the military helicopter that day. In fact, the MAGA camp's bullying of this woman caused her family to wait days to even release her name. Before they did that, they tried to get rid of her social media so that people couldn't flood it, writing nasty things about her and her death. And they released a statement once they did actually leak her name, trying to restore her humanity and give some actual picture into who she was. Not that it did any good, because these people are rabid. Like, how deranged do you have to be to dig up pictures of people who have just died in the public eye, post them online, and write, as this guy Joel Gilbert did, the female Black Hawk helicopter pilot, Captain Rebecca Lobach, was not named until today. Was it so they could scrub her social media? Her Facebook page has been wiped. However, her Google Plus image is below. If it turns out Lobach was a lesbian DEI pilot, I won't be surprised. Like, you are deranged. You need to seek mental health care immediately. This is not anything a sane, normal person would do. And I'm not exaggerating. This kind of junk is all over Twitter as we speak. Conservative commentators like Joey Jones on Fox News, who is a veteran and who credits Black Hawk pilots with saving his life when he was in battle, have had to come out publicly and push back on this because it has gotten so bad. Here's another person that says, I don't see how this was accidental. Was she texting on her phone while flying? Is that the accident? She flew directly into the plane. If she voted Trump, the media would be going crazy saying MAGA are killing Americans. No, I truly don't think that they care how people voted. I don't see the left doing this. I absolutely do not. The left has many faults. I don't see them giving a crap who somebody voted for when they died. As you can see in the tweet, they were quote tweeting, word has also gone around that she was a Biden aide. So apparently if you work for one of the two major parties, okay, I must continue to emphasize this, there are only two. If you happen to work for the wrong one in a significant portion of people's minds, then it doesn't matter what happens to you. Anything that comes your way is karma for that act of treason. I mean, it's absolutely stupid, okay? I cannot fathom being so indoctrinated, so cultish as to actually be like a diehard fan of either of the junk two major parties. I really can't believe you're that intelligent at this point, given all the information at your disposal, if you continue to be one of those people. I get like having to vote for the lesser of two evils and things of that nature, given the way that our system is rigged. But to rabidly be a fan of one of these two camps and think that you're like unequivocally good and the other side is unequivocally bad, you're low IQ. That's the only way that you can actually truly believe that things are that one-dimensional. And here's more. They're all like conspiratorial. Boy, it sure seems like the lesbian far-left Black Hawk pilot was a brainwashed patsy like the Trump assassins. She's been groomed by the Clinton and Obamas and Israel. Of course, they're going to get Israel in there because there's this weird overlap of anti-Semitism that's increasingly building on the right. I mean, all this is blatant sexism to a woman being in this position, and adding on top of that additional bigotry because they think she might have been a lesbian. Whew, I feel for you guys who are also Republicans, because these bozos in your midst make it really hard to defend yourselves against the, I think, often unjust attacks from the left, from people calling all Republicans racist and sexist and bigots. But the, I guess, uncomfortable fact is you've got way too many of them in your midst, and they are giving you a bad name too. Criticisms of DEI hiring practices are valid if we can even prove that they were a factor, which absolutely nobody in the Trump administration has done yet, okay? We don't even know if this young woman was flying the helicopter herself. We don't know exactly what all went wrong. We do know there was a breakdown in the communication system, which I'm going to get to. But as far as what role DEI played in this, you should have something pretty concrete to hang your hat on before you run out making these kinds of accusations, because you know inevitably that your base, which just stays foaming at the mouth, is going to immediately turn their energy and attack absolutely anybody who is in one of these positions who's not a white heterosexual male. And I have to say that assuming that somebody is a DEI hire when they are not that one certain demographic is just as stupid as people who push DEI in the first place. Okay, you're no different than them. You believe in identity politics as well. You just have different groups you favor for those identity politics versus the left. It's right-wing collectivist thinking. It's super woke, and I just cannot take these people seriously. But while Trump and his fans continue to waste everybody's time and mental capacity with these antics, the truth is that our safety system around aviation is just getting worse and worse every day. What you need to understand about the US aviation system is that we are supposed to have a layered safety system built around it, which is built up of air traffic controllers, who are the people who are guiding the plane through the skies and in and out of airports. The second layer is made up of pilots who are steering these planes, looking out in the skies around them and communicating with the air traffic controllers on the ground. And then lastly, you have a layer of security, which is technology that is supposed to be assisting both of those two parties and making sure that they are aware of things their own eyes might miss. And none of these layers is particularly strong at the moment, but the layer of the air traffic controllers is probably the one that is most likely to break through at this point in time. Now, per usual, the New York Times got their reporting right in this episode and many other pieces that they put out around this issue over the past year and a half, but they got their analysis wrong. So when they pointed their finger at the massive shortage that we have had for years now in the air traffic control space, they tried to blame Ronald Reagan for that shortage. Listen.
So the shortage in air traffic controllers has been going on for years, and it actually dates back to the early 1980s. Air traffic controllers went on strike illegally. They're federal employees. They were not supposed to strike, and President Reagan fired them.
Right.
He fired thousands of them. And to replenish the ranks, the government then had to hire new air traffic controllers.
The air traffic control strike that they're referring to with Ronald Reagan went down in 1981, and I might add that Reagan was absolutely right in that battle. I don't think that government unions should be allowed to exist at all in the private sector. That's fine. I still think it's kind of dumb to join a union, but in the public sector, no. Government employees should not be able to take our tax dollars and then use them against us, hold taxpayers hostage, or shake us down for more money. I agree with FDR on this thing and this thing alone. Okay, it's the one thing I've ever agreed with that monster on, but that's that public sector unions should be banned. So when the air traffic controllers tried to strike in 1981, which is illegal for public sector unions, Reagan was right to kick them out. I stand by that nonstop all day. But that happened long before I was even born. There is no way that that event is why we still have at this point in time a massive shortage, okay? A lot more has gone wrong, and that is really a distraction the New York Times was trying to point to because they're mad that Reagan beat the unions all those years ago, but also because they don't want to admit the real reason today that we have such a huge shortage, which is COVID policies that they emphatically supported.
So, of course, you had air traffic controllers who quit or retired early, as happened around the country in lots and lots of different industries, but it also slowed training. Training for air traffic controllers takes a while, it's very intense, but because of health restrictions, you couldn't train as many air traffic controllers as the FAA had to train. And so you just start falling more and more and more behind. And at this point, there are something like 10% fewer fully certified air traffic controllers than there were a decade ago.
Now, you notice that they brush right on over that in their reporting, right? They say that there was a increased exodus during COVID. They say that was due to health restrictions, but they don't actually specify what those health restrictions were. And they do the same thing with pilots because, interestingly enough, not only did you see a lot of air traffic controllers take early retirement or just flat out quit during that time, but the same thing happened with pilots. And this was actually pretty well known and covered because these two groups were being presented as particularly conservative in their belief systems, and the media was really maligning them and trying to dunk on them for refusing to comply with all of the numerous restrictions that were being placed on them in their jobs. This is a piece of the transcript from that same episode where the reporter says, so during the pandemic, you might remember that air traffic tanked. No one wanted to fly on planes. Airlines started furloughing their pilots and encouraging their older pilots to retire. And what happened was these older, experienced pilots, a lot of them did retire. And to replenish those ranks, the major carriers started relying on regional airline pilots, and the experience level in the cockpits decreased. So if you think about a 16-year-old driver versus a 45-year-old driver, the 16-year-old driver is going to be more prone to making mistakes. This is what people in the industry tell us, that on average, the experience level of pilots is a little lower. They're a little less seasoned, so they're just more prone to making mistakes. But again, they're skipping over what actually went down during COVID, okay? It's not just that the airlines were incentivizing pilots to retire or that air traffic controllers were being incentivized to retire due to like the actual flight load being lighter during that time. It's that they were getting pushed out if they refused to comply with government mandates or government policies that were being heavily pushed on the private companies. Things like vaccine requirements, there were travel restrictions for the pilots. If they didn't comply with that, they had to operate under mask mandates, which I remember having to fly as a passenger during that time and how awful it was. Like genuinely, you would have the worst headache at the end of the day. You could not breathe very well. Like flying was a miserable experience due to those mask mandates over like a 2-year period. I would have quit my job too. There's no way if I was a pilot, I would be willing to sit there in a mask for 12 hours a day while I'm flying. Absolutely not. So you had those things. They also had like really, really aggressive quarantine rules if the pilot happened to maybe be exposed to COVID, which how could you not? I mean, come on. They had to quarantine for numerous days. So a lot of them got pushed out because, again, many of them were more conservative, particularly on this issue. They were in mass refusing to comply. They were speaking out. They were pushing back. And so that is why you saw a mass exodus of both air traffic controllers and pilots. It had everything to do with very, very egregious, authoritarian, unconstitutional, anti-individual liberty, idiotic policies that they were pushing during that regime. You don't get to go back 40 years and blame Ronald Reagan for the current shortage that we had. And even as Republicans, I think it's very obtuse to blame DEI hiring practices for the scale of the problem that we are dealing with right here, right now. Are DEI policies at play? Have they been at play? perhaps I would expect that if they were at play, there was a push within these agencies to look outside the normal populations and try to recruit a larger number of people, given just how severe the shortages are. But I don't know. None of that's actually been laid out. We would actually have to see documentation of what those policies were. And interestingly enough, Republicans have not been presenting that, nor have their base been demanding it before they start leveling accusations at dead people. Not only did you have these factors at play, but it turns out that the third layer when it comes to our safety system, which is technology, is also not faring all that great. As the New York Times has pointed out, our technology is increasingly dated. The infrastructure around these organizations is crumbling. We aren't adding new technology to the vast majority of these facilities or to these planes, and that is because they don't have the money. At this point, I think you have to have a screw loose to genuinely believe that government can efficiently run anything. The truth is that this system needs millions of dollars to update technology, to build new infrastructure and facilities, to train and hire both pilots and aviation experts. And we're talking about millions of dollars that we don't have because our money is consistently being shipped overseas and doled out to politicians' buddies. And that's the real scandal here, not a freaking woman in the cockpit. But the most depressing part of all of this is that I don't expect either party to have any interest in actually addressing the real issue here and what would ultimately be the best solution, which would be a plan to progressively privatize this entire industry. Personally, I fear the problem is only going to get worse so long as we continue to trust the government to ensure our safety. All right, guys, let me know your thoughts in the comment. I'm curious for what you think. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Do make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. And if you want any more content, you can follow me on Twitter, TikTok, or Instagram.